One impulsive decision to save a stranger changed everything Remy Carr had ever known about staying safe, staying small, and staying alive. She hadn't even meant to look. That was the thing that haunted her afterward, in the sleepless hours before dawn, when the distant lights of Miami glittered through floor-to-ceiling glass, and the world outside felt like a different planet entirely. She'd been tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, adjusting her grip on the small clutch, holding her tip money from the first set, when she glanced toward the private mezzanine above the main ballroom of the Meridian Grand, and saw it. The recognition was instantaneous and involuntary. 4 years spent playing late-night jazz sets in every corner of this city had given Remy a musician's eye. The hyper-focused ability to read a room, to sense shifts in mood and atmosphere the way other people sense changes in weather. And the 3 men standing too close to the single man seated alone at the curved private bar above. They weren't guests at the Meridian Foundation's annual charity gala. Their suits were correct, their drinks were props, their eyes didn't move. Remy knew what that kind of stillness meant. Her Uncle Denny had worked narcotics out of the Miami-Dade Police Department for 19 years before a knee injury pushed him into early retirement. He'd taught her things she'd spent most of her adult life trying not to need. She knew how to identify the weight of a concealed weapon under fabric. She knew what a man looked like when he was deciding whether to pull it. The man they were surrounding was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit the color of deep midnight blue that fit him, as though it had been stitched directly onto his frame. He wasn't looking at his drink. He wasn't looking at the 3 men pressing in around him. He was looking out over the main floor of the ballroom with an expression of nearly meditative calm, the kind that didn't come from peace, but from absolute, practiced control. The leader of the 3 leaned down and said something directly into the seated man's ear. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The tendons along his right hand shifted. The 3rd man's elbow moved at a very specific angle. Remy's stomach dropped. She didn't think. She never did in the moments that mattered most. She'd learned that about herself from years of improvised sets, where the power cut out mid-performance or the drunk at table 7 started something ugly. Thinking took time. Instinct didn't. She crossed the main floor in 30 seconds flat. The staff access corridor that connected the ballroom level to the mezzanine above was unmarked and slightly concealed behind a service partition. She knew it because she'd used it twice tonight to bring water to the sound technician. She took the stairs 2 at a time, smoothed her black cocktail dress, and stepped through the door onto the private mezzanine as if she'd been invited. There you are. Her voice came out louder than she intended, bright and warm and unmistakably intimate. I've been walking in circles down there for 20 minutes. You didn't tell me this place had 3 different bars. All 4 men turned. The man in the midnight suit blinked, just once. But his eyes locked onto her with an immediate, surgical focus that was somehow more unsettling than the armed men surrounding him. Remy walked directly to him, slid her hand into the crook of his arm like she'd done it 100 times, and turned her most brilliant, apologetic smile on the man to his immediate left. Sorry, I'm stealing him. We have to get back before they start the second set. She glanced up at the man she was holding. You promised you'd introduce me to the foundation chair before midnight, remember? A beat of silence stretched between the 4 of them. Remy could feel the 3 men's eyes moving over her face, her dress, the way her hand rested familiarly against the man's arm, cataloguing, calculating. The leader, older Eastern European in accent and posture, a pale scar bisecting his left cheekbone, took 1 measured step forward. The gentleman and I are still talking. His voice was pleasant, his eyes were not. Remy kept her smile fixed and felt absolutely nothing below her sternum, which was how she knew she was terrified. I know. She squeezed the man's arm. 2 more minutes and then you're mine. She turned back toward the stairs, gently but unmistakably pulling him with her. And the man, who had not said a single word, whose face had remained carved from stone throughout this entire performance, stood up. He followed her. She could feel the three men's eyes on her back like physical pressure as she walked him through the mezzanine door and into the service corridor. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, she released his arm and pressed her palms flat against the cold concrete wall, trying to remember how to breathe. "The man on the left," she said without preamble, keeping her voice barely above a murmur. He had a weapon under his left arm. The one at the end was positioned to cut off the exit to the main stairs. That was not a conversation. She met his eyes in the dim fluorescent light of the corridor. "Whatever you're involved in, you need to leave this building right now. The service entrance is at the bottom of these stairs, through the kitchen, and out onto Brickell. There's a cab rank on the corner." The man looked at her. He had grey eyes, not the warm grey of weathered wood or morning fog, but the cold, fractured grey of shattered quartz. They moved across her face slowly and completely, the way a person looks at something they intend to understand. "What is your name?" he said. His voice was low, unhurried, and carried the kind of authority that didn't bother to announce itself. "It doesn't matter," Remy pushed off the wall. "Go now." "It matters to me." There was something in the way he said it that made her pause when she should have walked away. "Remy," she said against her better judgment. "Remy Carr." He absorbed this like she'd handed him something valuable. "Remy," a single nod. "I'm going to need you to walk out of this building with me." "What?" "No, you're going to walk out of this building. I'm going back to play the second set and pretend this never happened." "You touched me in front of them." His tone didn't change, but something in it did. A layer of quiet finality slid into place beneath the surface. "They'll have your face on camera within the hour. In their world, that makes you relevant." Remy's mouth went dry. "I did that to help you," she said very carefully. "I know." Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. It softened nothing, that's the problem. She wanted to argue. She was constructing the argument, the rational, sensible argument about how this was not her problem, and she was a jazz pianist who volunteered with the Coral Gables EMT unit on weekends and had absolutely nothing to do with whatever had just happened on that mezzanine. When the service door at the bottom of the stairwell burst open, one of the man's people filled the doorway. Not one of the three from the mezzanine, someone else entirely, someone who'd clearly been looking for him. "Sir." Controlled, but barely. "The car is on level 2. We need to move. Petrov's people have the main entrance covered." The man she'd been about to dismiss looked at his operative with an expression of total, unsurprised composure. "Petrov sent 6, not 3, he said. 8, sir. 4 on the entrance, 1 on each stairwell exit." "Then level 2 is already compromised." He said it like a scheduling inconvenience. "We go up. Access the sky bridge to the annex tower. Henley has a second vehicle at the loading dock on standby." The operative nodded and looked at Remy. "She's coming," the man said. Remy became aware, in the particular way you become aware of things when adrenaline has stripped away every non-essential thought, that she had absolutely no leverage here. She went. What followed was 7 of the strangest minutes of her life, moving through the fluorescent arteries of a luxury hotel at something faster than a walk, but slower than a run. Guided by a man who knew the building's infrastructure, the way Remy knew the chord progressions of songs she'd played 1,000 times. Instinctive, automatic, without hesitation. They emerged into the cool, humid air of a Miami November, through a loading dock that smelled of salt water and diesel, where a second black SUV idled with its back door already open. Remy got in. She told herself later it was because there was nowhere else to go. She told herself later it was the only rational choice. She suspected in her most honest moments that some part of her simply needed to know how the story ended. The man folded himself into the vehicle beside her. His lieutenant, a lean, dark-haired man named Dax Mora, who'd met them at the sky bridge, took the front passenger seat. The SUV pulled out of the loading dock. The explosion hit them 2 blocks later. Not an explosion exactly, a controlled strike aimed at the lead vehicle in their convoy, which flipped twice before coming to rest against the concrete barrier of the Brickell Avenue overpass in a column of black smoke and orange fire. In the immediate chaos of automatic gunfire from the bridge above, Remy understood three things simultaneously. She was lying across the back seat with the man's body covering her like a wall. The rear windows of the SUV were somehow holding against ballistic impact, and Dax Mora in the front seat had gone very, very quiet. Dax. The man's voice cut through the noise, controlled and immediate. Silence. Dax. Remy lifted her head. The front passenger seat was half-turned. Dax Mora was slumped against the door, his right hand pressed to his side, dark blood welling steadily between his fingers. His face had gone the color of old chalk. Remy moved before she'd decided to move. It was the same reflex that had walked her across the ballroom floor, the same override that cut thinking out of the equation entirely. She pulled herself over the center console and got her hands on Dax Mora's. Let me see. She moved his hand away from the wound. The entry point was mid-right flank, approximately the third intercostal space from the bottom of the rib cage. The bleeding was heavy but not arterial. She could tell the difference. She'd sat through enough mass casualty simulations to know what arterial spray looked like, and this wasn't it. The bullet had likely caught the lower lobe of the right lung or nicked the edge of the liver. Neither outcome was survivable without intervention, but neither was immediately catastrophic if she controlled the bleeding now. "What are you doing?" the man said. His voice was different. For the first time, it wasn't composed. "My job." Remy pulled off the silk sash tied at her waist. It was decorative, not functional, part of the dress. She'd hated it all evening and folded it into a tight compress. She pressed it hard against the wound. "Hold this, both hands. Don't let go and don't ease up pressure no matter what he says." She looked up at the driver. "How far to wherever you're taking us?" 12 minutes. "Do you have a first aid kit?" Center console. She ripped it open with one hand. It was not a standard hotel lobby kit. It was a trauma kit, stocked with tourniquet wraps, hemostatic gauze, and a chest seal. She made a mental note of what that indicated about the kind of organization she'd been absorbed into, and set the thought aside. "Dax." She kept her voice level the way she'd been taught. "Calm is contagious. Panic is contagious. Choose which one you spread. Stay with me. Tell me your full name." Dax Mora, thin but present. "Blood thinners? Anticoagulants?" "No." "Good. That's good." She worked steadily, efficiently, replacing the makeshift compress with hemostatic gauze, packed firmly against the wound and securing it with the trauma wrap from the kit. She kept talking, not because she thought Dax needed the distraction, but because she needed to hear her own voice staying steady. "The bleeding is slowing. You hear me? It's slowing." She became aware, at some point in those 12 minutes, that the gunfire had stopped, that the SUV was accelerating through darkness and the ambient sound of Miami had faded into open-road quiet, and that the man beside her had not said another word since she'd told him to hold the compress, but that he was watching her with an expression she'd never seen on a man's face before and couldn't immediately categorize. She focused on Dax. The facility they arrived at looked, from the outside, like a private medical practice in Coconut Grove, discreet, well-kept, dark-windowed. Inside it was something else entirely, a treatment suite equipped with the kind of machinery Remy associated with Level 2 trauma centers. 2 people in scrubs were already waiting when the SUV pulled into the private bay. They took Dax from her with practiced efficiency, transferring her wound packing without breaking the seal, rolling him through a set of double doors that hissed shut behind them. And then the room was empty, except for Remy and the man in the midnight suit. She stood in the middle of the anteroom in her cocktail dress, which was no longer entirely black, but had acquired a quantity of Dax Mora's blood across the left sleeve and hemline, and felt the adrenaline begin its long, brutal retreat. Her hands had started to shake. She crossed her arms to hide it. The man stood 6 feet away, watching her with those fractured quartz eyes. His jacket was gone. His shirt had come partially untucked during the chaos. He looked, for the first time, like someone who had been through something rather than someone who operated somewhere above the reach of it. "I need to go home," Remy said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I live in Coral Gables. I have a Sunday EMT shift at 7 a.m. and a 13-year-old cat named Leo who needs wet food twice a day. I am not part of whatever this is." "You were part of it the moment you put your hand on my arm," the man said. "I was trying to help you." "I know." He took one step toward her, just one. But the room seemed to rearrange itself around him when he moved. The air pressure changed. The geometry shifted. "Petrov's organization will have you on 4 separate cameras by now. By morning, they will know your name, your address, and the license plate on your Civic." He paused. "They do not forgive the people who interrupt their work." The shaking in Remy's hands moved up her forearms. She controlled it. "I didn't interrupt anything," she said with precision. "I took a man's arm and walked him down some stairs. That's all. I'm no one." "You are not no one." It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact that he'd already verified. And Yuri Petrov doesn't care about the distinction anyway. To him, you are the woman who touched Theron Slade in public. That makes you a liability he intends to remove. The name landed in the anteroom, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward through everything Remy thought she understood about the last 90 minutes. Theron Slade. She knew the name the way every person in South Florida knew it. Not from news coverage, because there was none. Not from court records, because there were none, but from the particular silence that fell around it in certain conversations. The deliberate, careful silence of people who understood that some names required a specific kind of quiet respect. She'd heard it once in her Uncle Denny's kitchen, late on a Thursday night when he thought she was asleep on the couch. She'd heard it once in the green room of the Blue Note on Biscayne, murmured between 2 men who left the building immediately after. She had never heard it spoken by the man himself. "You're Theron Slade," she said. It was not a question. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. "Oh," said Remy, and then after a moment, "That's really something." The ghost of something moved through his expression. Not amusement exactly, something more complicated than that. "I wasn't in danger on that mezzanine," he said. "Petrov sent 8 men to deliver a message. He did not send enough men to act on one. I was aware of exactly who was in that room and what they intended." He was quiet for a moment. "I did not anticipate you." "Nobody ever does," Remy said. It came out more raw than she'd intended. He looked at her for a long time, in the way that people only look at each other when they've briefly and unexpectedly glimpsed something essential. "I can't let you go back to Coral Gables tonight," he said. "You understand that?" "I understand that you believe it isn't safe." "It is not safe," he said. "There is no version of tonight in which it is." Remy turned away from him, walked to the window, and looked at the dark, quiet street outside. A palm tree moved in the warm breeze off the bay. Someone's wind chimes on the building across the way made a small, sweet sound. The world outside looked absolutely ordinary. "And what does keeping me here solve?" she asked, without turning around. "I'm a jazz musician and a part-time EMT. I have no information you want. I'm not connected to Petrov or anyone else in your world. I'm a problem that disappears on its own if you let it." "You saved Dax Mora's life tonight." His voice came from closer than she expected. She hadn't heard him move. "Do you understand what that means to me?" She turned. He was standing a few feet behind her, and the expression on his face was the one she hadn't been able to categorize, because it wasn't something she'd seen on a man like this. It was raw and unguarded in a way that his entire bearing up to this moment had made seem impossible. He looked like someone who'd been handed something he hadn't known he needed and couldn't quite work out how to hold it. "It means your lieutenant is alive," Remy said. "That's all it means." "It means," Theron Slade said slowly, "that I am in your debt, and I don't carry debts." He held her gaze. "You'll be moved to a safe house tonight. Your cat will be collected from your apartment by morning along with whatever you need. Petrov's reach will be neutralized within the week. He made a significant tactical error tonight, and I intend to use it. When it's done, you'll be free to return to your life." Remy absorbed this. The specificity of it, the cat, her things, the framing as a timeline, told her more about Theron Slade than anything else had. He didn't issue vague promises, he issued operational plans. "And if I say no?" she asked. "I won't force you." He said it without hesitation, and she believed it. "I'll have you driven home right now. I'll have 2 of my people watching your building. I cannot guarantee your safety, but I won't hold you against your will." A pause. "I'm asking you to trust me. I recognize I haven't done anything to earn it." Remy looked at him for a long, careful moment. A man who had just admitted he was willing to release her rather than contain her. A man whose lieutenant was breathing steadily behind a set of closed doors because she'd known what hemostatic gauze was and how to use it. A man who, for all the terror of the last 2 hours, had placed his body between her and the gunfire without being asked, and had never once looked at her like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be addressed. "Leo is particular about his wet food," she said finally. "It has to be the kind in the small cans, not the pouches, or he won't touch it. Make sure whoever you send knows that." Something shifted in Theron Slade's face. Something that had been tightly and permanently controlled for what looked like a very long time loosened, fractionally, and let a small amount of light through. "I'll make sure they know," he said. The doctors emerged from the treatment suite 40 minutes later to report that Dax Mora was stable, out of immediate danger, and asking for black coffee. Remy was sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair in the anteroom when they said it. She let out a breath she hadn't consciously been holding and dropped her face into both hands. She felt rather than heard Theron move to the chair beside hers. He sat. He didn't say anything. He didn't touch her. But his presence was solid and warm, and in some way she couldn't articulate and would spend considerable time afterward trying to, unexpectedly steadying. After a while she lifted her head. "I have 2 conditions," Remy said. He waited. "First, I make my own decisions about what happens after Petrov is dealt with. You said I'd be free to return to my life. I'm holding you to that, and I'm defining what that means, not you." He nodded, once serious. "Second, I want to see Dax before we leave. He was conscious when they took him in. He should know someone other than your organization was pulling for him tonight." Theron Slade looked at her the way the 3 men on the mezzanine had looked at her earlier. Cataloguing, calculating, except that what moved behind his eyes now was something entirely different from what had moved behind theirs. "Both conditions," he said, "are acceptable." Remy stood, smoothed the blood-stained front of her dress with a matter-of-fact efficiency she was quietly proud of, and followed the doctors through the double doors to see a man she'd met 40 minutes ago, whose life had passed through her hands like water. She didn't look back at Theron Slade as she went, but she heard him follow, 3 steps behind, quiet and certain as a tide. She didn't know yet what the week would bring. She didn't know how large the blast radius of a single impulsive decision could be, or how thoroughly the architecture of a carefully constructed ordinary life could be rearranged by one moment of pure instinct in a hotel stairwell. She didn't know what Theron Slade would look like at 6 in the morning, drinking coffee in the kind of safe house that didn't appear on any map, or how quickly she would stop being surprised that he was the one who refilled hers without being asked. She only knew what she'd known since she was 19, and her Uncle Denny had told her the one thing that stuck through everything else. The moment you stop moving, that's when they get you. Remy Carr kept moving,